Today I'm going to show you how to make a two-part mold using AeroMarine Products 128 silicone with the pourable catalyst. You're going to have a part, anything really. What you're going to do is you're going to find a good parting line, which is usually straight down the middle. You're going to take your part, use foam board or cardboard, whatever you have available. This one's been pre-cut because I know the sides. Once you've found your parting line, which on this one is going to be exactly in the middle, you'll lay your part down. You'll get some non-sulfur, non-drying clay. Once you found your parting line on your piece, I found that it's easiest to take your clay and roll it into a line and just put it down the middle of the part or wherever you want your parting line to be, to help mark where the other clay is going to go underneath of that. So I finished putting the middle line on it. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to take big pieces of clay and I'm just going to apply them in a uniform fashion all the way around the bottom part of this piece so that I have a parting line to start my two-part mold with. So now that we have a more or less uniform base all the way around it, I'm going to take a black scraper. Anything with a flat, hard edge will work. Kind of just flatten the clay out as best as you can. Make sure that there's a tight seal around the parting line of your original so that the silicone doesn't seep inside that, and just flatten the clay. You want it to be about an inch wider than the part. Some places obviously it'll be thicker because this part isn't one size all the way around. It varies in width. You can run your finger along the parting line of the clay to help give it a good seal to your original piece. So the reason that I put this clay down is to hold space for the second half of the silicone mold. In just a moment, we're going to put registration marks into this clay so that we can build our mold box and pour silicone on top of this part to get the first half of the mold. That'll all make sense in just a moment, I promise. So I finished putting the clay around the piece. You can see it's a little uneven around my parting line. The way that I'm going to fix that is I'm going to take a razor blade. I'm going to carefully run my razor blade around the edge. And you can do it in small sections if you want. And what this does is it really just gives me a line to be able to scrape this clay off. You can use your razor blade, you can use your whatever you were scraping the clay with before, and you just come away with the excess clay. When you finish scraping the excess clay off, you'll have to run your finger around the edge again just to flatten it out. When you're making a mold, you don't want to be in a hurry. Most of the mold making experience really is preparation. So getting your clay work right or figuring out how you want to make the mold before you even start is one of the best ways to ensure success. You might notice some spots that you need to add extra clay to while you're working, and that's perfectly fine. So once you've got the edge around your part looking clean, and you've got a pretty uniform surface all the way around, about an inch, at least an inch on all sides of the part. In this shape, it's a rectangle, because that's basically the shape of the candle holder that we're making. You just want to make sure that this is as smooth as possible and as easy as possible to make a mold box around. I'm using the end of the X-Acto knife to put registration marks in the clay so that when we pour the second part of the silicone mold, it will register with the first part to make a perfect seal so that you can get an exact copy of your part, of your original. So you want to put them about every 2 inches, about 1/4 of an inch deep, or if you're using bolts or something, you can just leave them in there. Try not to get it too close to the edge of your original. Your next step from here is going to be to build your mold box. So now I'm going to take these and I'm going to ask Holly to come over here and help me hold the cardboard so that I don't burn myself. We're going to start with one of the long pieces. You want to line it up with the edge of your mold so that it fits it as exact as possible. So Holly's holding it in place for me. I'm just going to apply a thin line of glue. We're gonna spin this around. Take one of the smaller pieces of cardboard. You can line the edges of it and put them down if you want, but I use clay to help. We're gonna run a line on the bottom, and on this one we're gonna run a line along that one as well. Hold it in place for a moment. Now we're gonna take this other long piece and line it up and have Holly hold it in place again. Okay, we're going to apply the last piece on the base. This time I'll hold it in place and let Holly glue, which we probably should have done from the beginning.
All right, ready?
Now that we've glued every corner, all the seams, I'm going to reinforce them with clay. Once again, I want to tell you that this is non-sulfur, non-drying clay. The reason that you want non-sulfur, non-drying clay is that specifically platinum silicones, but on occasion tin silicones tend to have a cure inhibition to the sulfur that can be in clays. So making sure that it's non-sulfur is a big deal. So I've applied a thin layer of clay to all the places that we put the glue, and you can see that all the way around the mold box on all the seams. Now let's take a look inside. So you can see this gap right here between the box and the clay. That's a really easy fix. Once again, take some warmed up clay, apply it to this edge, and smooth it in with the other clay so that it looks the same. Once this edge is fixed, you're ready to apply your mold release and mix your silicone. The clay I'm using does not contain sulfur. When working with silicones, especially platinum-based silicones, it's important to make sure that the clay you use does not contain sulfur. This is a silicone to silicone mold release. In this case, we're going to spray a light mist all over the clay and the original to provide a barrier between the silicone and the parts in this mold box. You want to shake it pretty well. Now we're just going to apply a light mist to the entire surface. Now that we've finished applying the mold release, we're going to mix up our silicone and pour it into our mold box. This is our AeroMarine 128 silicone with purple catalyst. I've learned over the years that it's easier to use 2 paint sticks to mix it and to mix it in smaller batches, because you can always add more silicone to silicone. The mix ratio on this silicone is 10 parts of the silicone to 1 part of the catalyst. The easiest way to figure that out is by using a gram scale. The biggest thing you want to see when you use the AeroMarine 128 silicone with the purple catalyst is that it needs to be a consistent color with no white streaks. When you start to pour, you want to pour it in the shallowest area of your mold and let it flow out naturally. And the reason for doing that is when you let the silicone flow out naturally, it helps dissipate some of the air bubbles. Another way to help with air bubbles is to hold your mixing container up and do a thin stream. With AeroMarine 128 silicone with purple catalyst, air bubbles are not a huge worry unless you mix the silicone too vigorously. You want to try and stick to, you always want to keep your paint stick or whatever you're stirring it with on the bottom of the container and do swirls and figure eights. And that way you're not whipping air into the mixture. So you can see the air bubbles in the top of the silicone right here. A really easy way to get those air bubbles out is by taking your mold, if it's small enough, and dropping it like a cake. So dropping it like a cake consecutively, generally 20-25 times, will help the air bubbles rise to the top and dissipate. Another thing you can do, since this rubber doesn't need to be degassed, is if you don't like the air bubbles on the surface, take a can of air in the can and just spritz the top lightly, gets rid of the air bubbles. So now that our pour is complete, we're going to wait 16 to 24 hours, and then we're going to open the mold box and have our first half of our mold. The first part of our 2-part mold has cured. What we're going to do next is dismantle the mold box, take the clay off, leaving our original part in place in the mold. So now that our mold box is dismantled, I'm just going to lift this and flip it over. From there, you can take the mold box off the top, which basically leaves the clay in place, and start taking the clay off while leaving the original part in the mold. And here we have the first half of our 2-part mold. If you see any little details, like there's some clay around here, you can just take an X-Acto knife, trim it off. Any extra silicone, same thing. Now, after you finish getting the little pieces of silicone and clay out of there, you're going to go ahead and keep your original in the mold. You're going to make another mold box. I'm going to go ahead and spray our silicone to silicone mold release on the sides of this mold to make sure that if any silicone leaks into the edges of the mold box, it does not bond. So now the box for the second part of our mold is glued and has all the seams reinforced with clay. The next thing we're going to do before we pour the second half is we're going to make sure that we put the silicone to silicone mold release all over the top of this mold. What this does is prevent it from bonding to itself. So now that we've applied the mold release to the mold, we're going to go ahead and pour the second half of our mold. The second part of our 2-part mold has cured, so we're just going to go ahead and dismantle the mold box. Go ahead and flip it upright if that's easiest, and take it apart. And there you go, 2-part mold. At this point, you can go ahead and take out the original. Make sure the surface looks good, looks great. Get rid of your mold box, put your mold back together, and start making your duplicates. Now that our 2-part mold is made, we're going to go ahead and start making duplicates of this candle holder. We're going to use AeroMarine off-white casting resin and AeroMarine urethane mold release. The first step would be to spray the surface of your mold with the urethane mold release. The reason that you would spray the surface of your mold is to preserve the life of your mold and help your part release easier from the silicone. You want to wait about 5 to 10 minutes and let that settle. While you're doing that, it is okay to put the mold back together. You're going to flip the mold upside down like this. Make sure that the lines look good. You can see the line is together. I'm going to go ahead and take some painter's tape and run it across that line. And it's okay to move your mold around, put it on its side, however you need to do it. So the reason that I'm putting the blow tape over the line is so that when we pour the urethane, this helps hold any that might leak out in the mold instead of spilling over your work surface. So now that the tape's all the way around the seam, we're going to go ahead and secure some truck tie downs around the surface or around the width of this mold. The reason we're using tie downs is because this is a rather large mold. If you were doing something smaller like a figurine, you could use rubber bands, or you could even just tape it all the way around with this painter's tape. I'm just going to use 2 tie downs. Pretty easy. Tighten them. And then I'm going to use the AeroMarine casting resin. I'm going to mix it up in a 1-to-1 ratio, pour it in here, wait 15 minutes and demold it. So it's been 15 minutes. We're going to go ahead and take the tie downs off of our mold. Take the blue painter's tape off. it is okay to set it on its side and take our part out. You'll notice that there is a slight parting line. Easy enough, you can sand it off, paint it, and it'll be ready to go. You'll have a candlestick holder that looks just like that. One of the great things about AeroMarine casting resin is that it's paintable. Just like with anything else, you're gonna apply a clear coat beforehand. Wet it dry for whatever the bottle recommends. Then take the color that you want it to be. This one's a silver. And then you're just gonna spray paint it the color you want it to be. Here's our new urethane candle holder, made out of AeroMarine urethane off-white casting resin. Our mold was made out of our 128 silicone with the purple catalyst, which makes it pourable. We used our Petrolise, which is a silicone to silicone mold release, and a urethane mold release to preserve the life of the mold. All of these products can be found at AeroMarineProducts.com.